In the last video, I spoke about how to use the select from statements. So today we're going to take a look at how to add the where and the goodbye clause to this. So we're going to look at how to use the select from, where, and goodbye. Let's see everything in the invoice items table. Use our select and from. So we want to see everything from the invoice items table. So in the invoice items table, we have the items table, we have the invoice ID, the track ID, the unit price, and the quantity. So the quantity shows us the tracker. You notice that in each invoice ID, we have more than one track. That means more than one track was sold per invoice or per transaction. And the invoice ID for that transaction is one. So that means that in that particular transaction, in transaction one, they bought tracks 2 and 4, and each of the track costs 99 cents. Now, if we look at invoice ID number 2, we see that about 4 items were bought at the same time from the store. That's different tracks. 4 different tracks were bought, and this is the price and then the quantity. So now, assuming we want to get the total amount, the total price of all the tracks that were bought from the store. I mean, we want to get, okay, for track 2, we want to know how many items were bought, how many of the tracks were bought, and then what is the total amount that the total amount sold per track. Like track 2, how many track 2 items were sold, and what is the total amount made from track 2 or sold from track 2. So let's create another query. So we're still going to start our query with the select from. So let's just type select and from. And this time around, we want to group by. So we'll just put group by. So the first thing we want to do, what we are interested in the tracks. So okay, again, from which table? Let's put our table first. We're going to pick from the invoice ID items table. So and I'm going to give it an alias and call it I, so that when I come here, indent to make your query look presentable, I'm going to say I dot. So we're going to click on, so that it brings out all the columns under invoice items table. So now we're going to pick the columns that we want. I'm interested in the track ID. I'm interested in the unit price. I'm interested in the quantity. Now we know that this quantity, we want to, if we leave the quantity like this, it's not going to give us um, the correct values that we want. So because what we want is to have the total, like if track 1, for instance, was we have about, let's assume we have 5 transactions or 5 invoice IDs, and invoice 1, for instance, bought track 1, invoice 5 bought track 1, maybe invoice 3 bought track 1. What we want to do is to add all track 1s in all those different invoices together. We don't want them to be separated. We want all the track 1s to be the total quantity of track 1 bought, and then before we now have the total amount for track 1. So it's just like simple arithmetic. So what we want to do is to tell it to sum up all each track that are the same, each track that has the same track ID, pick them from all the invoices, from the individual invoices, sum them together before you find the total amount. So for that, we're going to do an aggregation. We're just going to put the sum. So we're going to put the quantity in bracket and say sum it all up, sum all track 1s together, whether they are in 10 in different invoices, it doesn't matter, as long as long as the track ID, which is the identifier for each track. It's just like when you go to the supermarket, you know that they put numbers on each of their items to identify them, to say, okay, maybe sugar, St. Louis sugar is item number 1. So if they have 10 of St. Louis sugars, they have that number 1 on that item, so that they can identify the total amount. So when they are doing their inventory, it's the same thing with the track IDs here, so that each track that is sold by the company has a track ID. It is that track ID that identifies each track. So if you have your track ID in 10 different invoices, that means you sold track ID 1 to 10 different customers. I'm not interested in, the different customers or the different transactions. I just want to know the total amount of, track ID number 1 that was sold. I hope I've been able to explain that. So we're going to give it an alias and call it quantity. So we can as well just leave it as some as call it this. Okay, let's assume we leave it as that before giving it an alias. Let's leave it at that. And then now we want to find the total amount for each track. Because here we have the unit price. So we can find the total amount by just multiplying the quantity and the price. So for total amount is quantity times price. So that's what we're going to do here. We can put it in bracket, or let's leave it without doing an alias. So we're going to say I want the total quantity at the unit price to be multiplied by the total quantity sold as well. So give me that as well. So let's run this and see how it looks. Oh, sorry, I didn't have the goodbye. So, like from what I said, from what we've been talking about, we want to know the total quantity per track. This aggregation we're doing it based on the track IDs. So we're going to say that it should group by the track ID. So let's run this now. So when we run this, we see that it has given us our table. These are all the tracks. So track ID number 1 that's the unit price. Then the sum. That means that for that period, only one item of track ID 1 was sold. Now look at track ID 2. That means that two quantity of track ID 2 was sold in that period, within that period, and that's why we had 2. So it's going to go on and on like that. So it's going to go on. If we look at the next row, we see that there are track ID 48, so 2 quantity was sold. Same with track ID 66. And if we go on and on, so these are all the items on and on like that. Now let's take a look at this column. This column says some I quantity. So we can say, okay, oh, this is the column, oh, but I don't want it to be called this. I want it to have a more, you know, a name that makes better sense. So that's why we say make it quantity, call it quantity. Now for the unit price column, for this, yeah, the total amount column. I know that this is the calculation for total amount. I don't want it to look like this, I dot unit price times I dot quantity. Let it be called total amount column. So we put this in bracket and say as total amount. So now when we run this, see that it looks a lot better and it gives better information to anybody looking at it. Okay, or you can even say this is total quantity to even make it more that, okay, I've done an aggregation on this and this is the total quantity, this is the total amount. So we can do that as well, so that we see that this is our total amount. So that is how to do, a group by statement. Now if we want to pick a specific column, give it a specific condition. I don't want to see everything in the table. I'm only interested in a particular, track ID or I want to see only track ID number 10. Let's assume I say I want to see track ID number 10. We'll now go here and say and give it a condition where, let's say, track ID, I dot track ID is equal to 54. Let's assume there's a track ID called 54. Let's run this. You see that automatically what it gives us is just track ID 54. All the other track IDs, we're not interested in them. Maybe at that point, you don't need all the information that that is in the table. You only need specific information. You write an instruction, you give it an instruction and say, this is what I want. You can discard everything else. So this is how to use the where statement. You are using it to filter an item. So you are filtering out only track 54. You can use it to filter out maybe items that are greater than a particular quantity here. For instance, we can say I dot quantity is greater than or equal to maybe 1. And then when we filter, is greater than or equal to 1, so that when we filter, it brings out only items with quantity that is above 1. You know that this quantity is the aggregated quantity. It is not the actual quantity. So if we want the filtering is being done on the actual quantity. So it's going to show us everything that are, the quantity that is above one. So that means that it's working with this table, not with the aggregated quantity. So that's basically what the where statement does. So that is it for the select, from, where, and group by statement. Remember that you start your statement, your query with the select, and select means you want to select particular set of items. You want to, these are the items. That select is like bring out, is like show me. That's what select is saying. Select is saying show me, or release, or pick particular columns from this table. I don't want to see all the columns. I only want to see these specific columns. And then you go ahead and tell it the columns you want it to display. And then the from statement is you are telling it from which table. Like if you look at this side of the data of our data set, you see that there are several tables. So you cannot just say select and not tell it where it's selecting from, or where the selection is going to be done from. You have to specify that, okay, oh, I want this track ID unit price from a particular table, and that table is called the invoice items table. Now, why I used an alias is for it to easily pick out the columns when I type the alias. When you type the alias, it automatically brings out the column. So it just makes life easier. It's not like you have to do it. Like I said, you don't have to. And then the where clause is like a conditional statement. It's telling you, I don't want everything, even though I want this particular item from this table. I don't want everything. I want only the ones that fall into this condition. I want only items that has a quantity of one, or I want only item number, maybe track ID 54, or track ID. Sorry, we have to put the alias I dot track ID. Um, let's say 72. I hope there's a 72 track ID, so that when you call it, it brings out that particular track ID. So you see that it still gives you all the columns that you wanted. It still gives you the track ID column, the unit price column, the total quantity column, the total amount column. So it brings out everything, all the columns that you requested for, but only that particular track. And then the group by is because we're doing an aggregation. We're doing sum, and we're doing this, which is a product. That's multiplication here, addition here. So we are telling it that the basis for which you are going to do this addition is to group them by the track IDs. That means that you're telling it that I want you to add up all the track IDs that are the same, add them up together to give me one quantity for that track ID. So if we have 72 in 10 different places, it will only release 172 and add up all the quantities across the table, all the quantities that are for track ID 72, add it up across the table and release the total quantity here. Then multiply the total quantity by the unit price and give the total amount. So that's what the group by statement does. That's all I have for you today. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you for watching. Bye.